welcome to Can Renewables Power the World? This is the opening debate in the strand Energising Growth. I'm Rob Lyons. I'm the Science and Technology Director at the Academy of Ideas, and I also convene the Academy of Ideas Economy Forum. You would have to have been living in a cave for the past 3 decades not to have noticed that climate change is a massive issue in politics and society right now. Everyone from governments to the United Nations argues that it's imperative that we end our reliance on fossil fuels. The UK has legislated to reach net zero by 2050. But how will we power society if not using oil, coal, and natural gas? The answer for many is through renewables, harnessing the seemingly never-ending power of nature rather than digging up the ultimately limited supply of fuel from beneath our feet. Renewables include, most obviously, wind and solar power, the things that we're most familiar with, but it also includes hydroelectric, geothermal, wave power, tidal power, and bioenergy. That's creating, growing trees and crops to create fuels. All this on the surface seems uncontroversial, but would it work? And if it would, what will be the cost? To energise our discussion, I'm here all week, we have a panel of experts who are entirely renewable and cutting edge and not in any way fossils. Sunday morning. I'll briefly introduce them in the order they'll speak. Professor Dr. Michaela Kendall is the CEO of Adelan. She's the UK Hydrogen Champion for Mission Innovation for the UK government. The UK Hydrogen Championships are on Sky Sports 8. Sorry. I'll stop now. I'll stop. Simon Nash is an environmentalist, speaker, activist, and founder of Green Oil Bicycle Lubes. Dr. Ralph Schoellhammer
well done.
Is commentator and podcaster and a lecturer at Webster University Vienna and MCC Brussels. And Professor James Woudhuysen is visiting professor of forecasting and innovation at London's South Bank University. He's also the co-author of Energize, which is an excellent book you should check out, but it's not on the bookstall, sadly. All right, so I've asked them all to speak for 6 to 7 minutes each, and then I'll open the debate for your questions and comments. So, Michaela.
Thank you. Yes, so I've got 5 points to make today. And thanks, first of all, for the invitation. But I've got these 5 points to make to the audience. The first point about renewables is we shouldn't start here. I think the energy policy of the UK requires radical new thinking. And actually, we've had chronic energy policy failure. And really, we're all sat in this hall today trying to figure out the energy policy for this country. I sit around kitchen tables around the UK trying to figure out what should we do, what's the best technical option, what's the best political, social. Isn't this somebody's job? I would hope so. So if it is, then certainly there's some failures going on. I think UK regulators, that's politicians, that's civil servants, it's vested interests, and certainly scientists as well. We've failed, really, to make the case clearly. So I want to first inject a bit of rationality and logic into this. I want a bit of science, I want a bit of evidence, I want some numbers, because we actually deserve better than this. And other countries do get it right, not all the time. Policy making is absolutely a dynamic process. And so we have to reflect on policy frameworks and we have to change them when they don't quite work. But we do need to do it differently. And for me, that means including more scientists and engineers in policy making. It's absolutely crystal clear to me when I talk to foreign governments that they have more engineers and scientists involved in their policy making. And I would point directly to China as one of those, but the USA also, and all around Europe. And we also need to include women in this process. That somehow, I don't know how it's happened, but we need more female technologists. And we need more female businesses and financiers, and I just don't understand why we're not using all of our talents in this country. So the first point is this: let's not start here, let's do something radical. So that's why I like today's talk, and I like the dynamic of this room. I hope we can have some good debate. The second point I'd like to make is we need to go back to distributed and decentralised energy. So in the 50s, we had a problem with air pollution and energy generation because fires in our homes, which was in distributed decentralized power, was causing air pollution. And so we had to centralize power generation outside of cities to dislocate, to disconnect people's exposure to air pollution and energy generation. And by centralizing it, it made a lot of sense at the time. But once you stop creating pollution from energy technologies, you don't need them to be outside the city, and you don't need them to be centralized. So renewables offer that decentralized option. And that, for me, is it makes perfect sense because there's a lot of efficiencies there. You're using power where you generate it. You're not losing energy during the transmission of that energy. So there's a lot of positives around that. So vehicles brought back air pollution into cities. Combustion is the problem. It's not energy. So we have to reflect and say no more combustion, and that's a serious business, and we have to go towards electrification of homes and vehicles. But we can't electrify everything. We need molecules, we need fuels. And everybody's in broad agreement on this now. So my third point is we need every tool in the box to solve this problem. In 1995, scientists reached consensus. Climate change is a huge problem we cannot ignore, and the models are absolutely crystal clear on what's going to happen if we don't solve it. We're now on target for 2.4 degrees C rise, and that's really going to cause incredible devastation around the world, and we have to do something about it. So all options need to be on the table. According to Tesla, who are pro-electrification, they estimate about 25% of the energy system will be fuel. It will have to be molecules. Those have to be green molecules. They could be biofuels, they could be green hydrogen. We don't need to decide that now, but we know that fuels will be important. But at the moment, because combustion is used so regularly, our energy system is very inefficient, and we don't need all the energy that we use right now. We're actually wasting an awful lot. So it's really open discussion now to do something radical and to include everything. I know that nuclear is on the programme today, so I won't touch on it now, but I'd like to touch on it later and reflect on nuclear. But wind and solar, and this is my fourth point, wind and solar work perfectly well. When I was graduating in 1993, the technology was ready. That wasn't the problem. The finance was the problem. It was too expensive, and we couldn't work out a way to pay for this stuff because it's not that it's more expensive. That is a false narrative. Renewables are not more expensive, they're cheaper. And the evidence that I'll give you for that is that developing countries use renewables as an option because it's an easier way, a cheaper way for them to deploy infrastructure. And that's incredibly important. It's a different model, it is financed differently, and people may not make as much money out of it as they do out of the carbon industry, as I call it. Aramco made $208 billion profit in the last 12 months, and we will be contributing to that this winter as we go towards paying our fuel bills. And that's where policy has seriously failed. So no government alone can afford this, and we do need to have private finance to support it, but finance has to operate differently as well, and investments are key. My fifth point, hydrogen solves the intermittency of renewables. That's the benefit. It allows green electrons to be stored. You generate power when you don't need it. You can store those electrons as a fuel, and that can be used. It's called power to X, so it's a renewable power going to generate fuels, but it's most important in transport and heavy industry. Hydrogen is already £150 billion worth of a global market in 2020. It's nothing new. We know how to do it. It's just that we don't do enough of it. We don't do it enough right now. I've got a book here, and I'd really point you towards a TEDx talk that I've done on hydrogen. It summarises the benefits. But the UK has all the assets it needs, but it doesn't have the political will at the moment, and we need to push for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Michaela. Simon.
Well, I think climate change is important, and we need to look after the next generation. 16 to 18-year-olds, they lost the right to play the lottery. They've lost the right to use laughing gas, and now Rishi Sunak wants to make them do maths until 18. So the least we can do is look after the planet. So the Stern Review also offers an economic argument, saying that if we do not solve climate change, the costs in the future will be huge. Now, one of the arguments against renewables, I am in favour of renewables, and actually we can meet our energy needs with just renewables. People say, what about the storage, the Morpheus from the Matrix style battery there? Well, there's the Dinorveg lake in Wales. So it's a lake, they pump the water to the top of a mountain, store it in the lake, and then the water comes down, the kinetic energy is turned into electricity. You could have 100 of these around the UK, and we could have our needs met with just renewable energy. Again, we have batteries. The Tesla Powerwall, great bit of technology. If every house had one of those, that would get rid of the ebbs and flows from renewable energy like wind and solar. Lithium is absolutely abundant. 17 parts per million in the ocean. A company in Japan can extract that from the ocean. There is plenty of lithium. Do not believe this lie that there's just one African mine full of little children, and that's the only source. And of course, you might notice a lot of people who seem to be against the environmental movement after using plastics and mined minerals for their cars, their phones, everything, are suddenly interested in mining and it being a terrible thing because renewables need some of that. So it's a great future that we have. The incandescent light bulb. Do you remember these? This is 100 watts of energy for a bit of light. And then, 10 years ago, most people then had energy-saving light bulbs. This uses 10% of the power of that with the same amount of light. And now we have LED lights. That's 10% of the power of an energy-saving light bulb. So that's from like 12 years ago, and that uses 1% of the power for the same amount of light. This is a beautiful thing, and energy efficiencies do play a huge part. Also, we went from like 2% renewable energy in Tony Blair's time. Gordon Brown wanted to build 8 new coal-fired power stations and expand Heathrow Airport. We were on about 2% renewables. We're now on about 42% renewables. The breakdown of that is 27% wind, 5% biogas, 5% biomass, which should be farm waste and so on, and then hydroelectricity being powered from rivers and so on. And then we've got 25% nuclear power in the UK, and the goal is to get that to 35%. This is a huge thing. We are decarbonising our national grid as we speak, and we need to keep that impetus and keep that going. I'm really optimistic about that. Like a giant wind turbine, the new one's being built, one circulation of that turbine, or windmill you might call it, that powers a household's worth of electricity, like one spin of that. So there's huge potential. I'm going to say the N word, trigger warning, nuclear. I have already said it. There is, I think, an irrational movement against nuclear. I think charities like Friends of the Earth, because they are not democratic, they do not listen to their members in an AGM in a democratic way. They're just ideologically against nuclear, maybe due to some association with nuclear weapons. I mean, as far as I know, tanks and things are also made from metal, as are wind turbines, but we're not against those. I mean, seriously, with nuclear waste, if it's dealt with, the amount of nuclear waste per person. So imagine carbon from a coal-fired power station. That's a rucksack or two's worth of carbon for each individual in the country. It'd be a 16-mile wide mountain of carbon if we were to store that and capture it. Here's my eco-friendly product garden oil, an equivalence WD-40 on Kickstarter now. Check it out. So 400 millilitres. 25 millilitres, that's the amount of nuclear waste, high-level nuclear waste per human in the country. So that would be like 10 or 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of nuclear waste. We could store that on a military base or somewhere. The problem of climate change is far greater than the risk of nuclear waste. And energy-saving light bulbs, advocated for by Greenpeace and every environmental charity, contain mercury. You have to recycle these in your dump to get the mercury out. They weren't against these because of a bit of mercury, which is very polluting. So we need to put things in perspective, and I think the environmental NGOs should become more democratic. I run London Green Drinks. Environmentalist meets every month in London. The vast majority in favour of nuclear, and I think today's environmental NGOs don't really speak for us in that respect. Geothermal, another great solution. So you have geothermal rocks in Iceland. I think it's one of the world's largest aluminium producers. They run it from the rocks underground, which are hot, from the lava from when the world was made. In Southampton, they built a geothermal system, powers 15% of the region. So that's a really great thing. Solar panels, a house covered in solar panels can power an electric car for 13,600 miles if you have solar panels on your house. And the average car travels 7,000 miles a year, so around half of what's produced, which means you've got the capacity of the, the C word, like electric cars. Like, can I hear a boo or a cheer for electric cars? Boo! Yeah, okay, a few yays, yeah. Well, they conveniently fill the gap. So with our envisioned renewable energy capacity with wind turbines, that about matches the spare capacity of the 30 million electric cars which are planned. So electric cars can be used to store the energy, and then that energy can go back into the grid. I mean, this is great. Now, some people go, oh, what about the transitioning? That's a different sort of transmission of electricity. How do we get that from the wind turbines and the national grid? Like, can't be set up. As I said last year, imagine 100 years ago, people said, oh, I've been burning whale oil and coal in my house. Like, what's this electricity stuff? A national grid of electricity for that's mental. We can do it. It is happening, and the government appointed someone called David McKay recently, who's getting Ofgem in charge of the national grid to get it more run properly. So if you build a renewable energy capacity, you can more easily plug it into the grid, and that was commissioned just this year. That's being solved. I want you to think about renewable energy like free money. We've got sun coming from the sky, we've got wind in the air. It is like this coin, which I'm going to throw into the audience, it's free. Think about that compared to coal and all these other sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Right, two positive and different cases for renewals and a bit more as well. Over to you, Ralph.
Well, before I begin my talk about energy, let me give everybody in the audience a little bit of relationship advice. I think this is going to come in handy. Before you break up with someone, you really want to make sure that what you lose is worth losing. And I think this is also the question in the energy debate. We hear all about this talk about, getting off coal, getting off gas, getting off oil. We should envision what a world looks like where this is actually happening. We have become a tremendously energy hostile society. So I'm going to give you a few numbers. They're going to be on the test after this talk, so you might want to take notes. Every year, right, the human species uses about 100 billion barrels of oil as energy equivalent. You might say, okay, that's a number. What does that number mean? Let me kind of translate this into actual work. That number is equal to 500 billion people working for you, right? This is what the modern energy industry does. Everybody in this room has the equivalent of 200 people working for them non-stop 365, right? You have to keep this in mind. This is what the modern energy industry does for us. We simply assume that everything is working like this. I would even go so far and say, everybody in this room, you went to the most important of all the panels. Because all the other debates you have in the other rooms about transgenderism and all these kind of things, the reason why we can afford having these debates is because we live, for now, in a world of energy abundance. So we have the luxury, we are so rich, that we can discuss absurdities because the wealth that has been generated by energy. Now let me go a step further. Did anybody of you watch Lord of the Rings? Yeah. All right, there we go. Now I actually always sided with the orcs. Not because of the similarity in looks. I was actually hoping there would be like a pushback from the audience, so I take note about this as well. But it's if you look at it, you have all these different races. It's the orcs and the dwarves, to be honest, right? Because they are actually reflecting humanity much more than the other races. The elves are just, these fantasy beings that are in harmony with nature, and they have all this food that nourishes you for months, and the humans are just, they're neither here nor there. But it's the dwarves and the orcs who do industry, right? If you watch the movies, they are the ones who, which is of course horror, right? They cut down the forest. They have, they do all this fire and flame and mills and all these kind of things, which is what we human beings do as well. Because let me tell you one thing: there is this idea that we can live in harmony with nature, that we can be in this balance with nature. Let me something that's also going to be on the test. Nature wants to kill you. At every turn, nature wants to kill you. And the reason why nature is not killing us is because we found ways to use energy to protect us from everything that nature wants to do to us. We are very sensitive to cold. We are very sensitive to heat. We don't have claws. We are very weak, right? We really are very very, very badly equipped to survive in nature. So what allowed us to do so, it was our ability, first of all, our social abilities, but the second ability was, for example, fire, right? Was building things. And what is building things ultimately? It's the use of energy, of physical energy, right? And we got better and better and better. Do you know, I mean, I'm sure you all know the story of, the Greek story of Prometheus. Right, the Prometheus gave the flame to human beings, and the gods, Zeus, everybody was like super upset, and that they chained him to the mountains, and the eagle comes every day and eats his liver and all of this, or what I call, the Sunday after a heavy Saturday night feels pretty much the same. But that's the thing, right? The gods, the Zeus and the others, why were they so upset? And I get why they were upset. Because they probably realized once humanity had energy, once we had fire, which I say is basically the first kind of combustion, if you will, we no longer needed the gods, right? Modern energy use made us as similar and as close to gods on this earth as it is possible. I know that's a blasphemic thing to say, but you have to keep this in mind. So many things we can do, so many things we can afford, come from the fact that we have this abundance of energy available. I would say, going a step further, I agree. Like, I would like us to get off coal because coal is really polluting. But as I said with my relationship advice earlier, right, when you break up with someone, you want to at least, show some respect to the relationship you had before. And I would make the argument that coal has done more for humanity than any other resource. Like when we hear the story, the abandonment of slavery, right? The freeing of the human mind, the freeing of individuals, the breaking of chains. Now, I don't want to belittle the people behind this, right? I don't want to belittle the abolitionists. I think these were fantastic people. But they had an ally starting in the 18th century in the steam engine. Because all of a sudden, it was not just that they had the moral argument on their side, they had the economic argument on your side. I give you one example. In 1870, the steam engines in Britain were conducting as much work as 40 million people. You know how many people lived in Britain in 1870? 26 million. Right? You could not do this. So you could not do this with human labor. You needed the energy that comes from this. The same is true when we look at later on, like at oil, when we look at gas. These are gifts in many, many ways. Oil, again, everybody's against oil. I get it, right? The oil industry might be a really bad industry, but the resource they're extracting is a very important one. It is, if you forgive me saying this, in many ways, it is superhero juice. Can you imagine how many products of our daily lives that we encounter do you think come out of oil? Precisely, 6,000 products of our daily life come from oil. Right? The kind of gasoline is just a kind of one of the many products. The entire petrochemical industry. For example, if any one of you gets a heart attack because of my horrible speech, the ambulance that comes runs on gasoline. The tires of the ambulance come from the petrochemical industry. The asphalt on which the ambulance is driving comes from the petrochemical ambulance. The tube they put in, they put in you to the breathing apparatus comes from the petrochemical industry. The antibacterials, the antibiotics, all of this is part of the petrochemical industry. So if we say we want to get rid of this, or as I think the famous saying goes, just stop oil, you don't want to live in that world, right? This sounds really, really amazing. Try it. And you know what we know? Because there are parts in the world where they do this. For example, in Africa, we have places on this planet that have very limited access to energy. You know how these places are to live? They are horrible. The highest number of child marriage correlates directly with lack of access to energy and with lack of access to electricity. And you know why? Because if you don't have a washer and a dryer and a stove, you get a slave, which is exactly what this is. So if we turn our back on energy, we basically turn our back on many of also the moral progress we've made in the past. We have to be very much aware of this. And one last point, and we're going to talk about this in greater detail, about that it is possible to transition away. Like I put something to the left side of the panel. I want the prototype. I want one English city that runs on storage and renewables. Like every business would do this, right? If you say you can transition away the entire economy, transition one English city away, and then we can talk. To say I cannot change one city, but I can change the world is an argument I have troubles with.
Thank you very much, Ralph. And finally, James.
Well, I'm here to tell you that there's an important new departure in energy generally, and that is that we don't just have green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, grey hydrogen, yellow hydrogen, but also we've got pink hydrogen, turquoise hydrogen, and I've learned from Michaela that there is a physical phenomenon called women in hydrogen. I prefer them in oxygen myself. But, and also there's a thing called green electrons. That's new to me. Simon is also new to me in saying that I think you said 25% of our energy, electricity, is generated by nuclear. Yeah, it's 17%. And what did you say it would be in 2050?
35% according to a government white paper, yeah.
No, it's 25%. So before we go any further and agree with Simon that 41% of our energy or electricity is composed of wind.
Did the government lie in the white paper? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
If I might just continue, and if I might have extra time. You know, one thing about that 41% figure is it's intermittent. So it's not 41%. At a moment in time, it might be 41%. But in order for it to be 41% reliably, 24/7, in a consistent, dispatchable fashion, so if I want it, I can get it, then you're going to need battery storage. And there are many problems with battery storage that I hope we can go on to discuss. But standing back from it all, one of the things that's happened with offshore wind, which is really perhaps the most important focus for our discussion this morning, since Britain is well endowed with wind as a natural phenomenon. One of the most important things that's happened with that, as you will be aware, is that the famous auction governed by civil service contracts for difference for wind power failed earlier this year when wind power people in the industry said that they would not be prepared to guarantee prices of £47 or thereabouts per megawatt hour for wind power. And the fact is that the reason behind that is that the costs of assembling wind turbines in the North Sea have risen dramatically. Why is that? It's a little thing called interest rates. When you calculate the cost of any particular energy source, the whole idea is ridiculous because energy is a complete system. For every wind turbine that you put up, because it's intermittent, you will need a backup, usually gas-powered electricity, to handle the 59% of the time that it is not functioning. In fact, it's higher than that. It's more like 70% of the any installation for solar or wind is inoperative for is inoperative for 70% of the time. So you're going to need gas to back up this system. The more solar and wind you install, the more gas you will need. Gas is dispatchable, unlike nuclear. So to isolate any particular source, still less to group them all together as renewables, is an inadmissible procedure, not least because the way of calculating the cost of those individual sources is done by what's called levelized cost of electricity comparisons. If you go to Wikipedia just this once, you'll find that levelized cost of electricity strongly reflects the discount rate, or what you and I know as the interest rate. And those interest rates are particularly the factor that has driven up the costs of offshore wind, because to install a turbine offshore, you have a big capital cost up front, you have to borrow money for that. And you and I know through our mortgage payments that the cost of borrowing money has risen dramatically. So it's inadmissible to separate off any particular source. And if you don't factor in the fact that renewables are subject to economic fluctuations, rises in interest rates, and rises in raw materials costs, then anything can happen with the price of renewables. Now, as it happens, we could discuss, and I'm very happy to discuss, what happens at the other end of the process. How you dispose of wind turbine blades, what happens when you try to dispose of solar panels, and the news isn't all bad there. There are ways emerging of recycling even the wind turbine blades that are buried as landfill. But the fact is, on the input side, that what you so cavalierly, Simon, dismisses, children mining raw materials, we're all interested in mines all of a sudden because us hostile elements to renewables were never interested in mines before. I was always interested in mines. And if you look at Chinese mines, you will find thousands of casualties and fatalities every year under the Chinese Communist Party. But it is entirely unfair to the 40,000 children that we're supposed to know about who mine for cobalt, an essential material for electric cars, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They do that with their hands. And to say that decentralized sources of energy and all of these things work so well in the underdeveloped world, in the emerging economies, is to condemn those economies to no growth, no industrialization. You cannot make industry for Africa without gas power. Gas is the way forward for Africa, and African regimes from Senegal to Nigeria are recognizing that. To confine the developing world to renewables is a recipe for the slavery that Ralph so eloquently described.
Interesting.
Right. I think we've got a clear division of opinion there. So, yes, sir, if you could stand up for the camera, that would be very helpful.
First of all, if renewables are so cheap, why is my domestic energy bill gone up 300% in the last year? And please don't say it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because the wholesale gas prices reverted to pre-invasion levels in less than a month after the invasion. So as far as I can see, the cost of my energy now is primarily because of government energy policy and nothing else. Secondly, I've got solar panels on my roof because when I installed them in 2011, that was probably the best investment I could make with the money I had available at the time, and it's proved to be a very good investment. But the fact is, I'm now getting a feed-in tariff of 68.3 pence per kilowatt hour. And I think if you look at your energy bills, you'll find that most people are paying about 30 pence per kilowatt hour. So the government subsidy on the feed-in tariff is more than twice what people are actually paying for their power. And I'll just finish by saying, I think, to quote the excellent Dr. Patrick Moore, wind turbines don't run on wind, they run on subsidy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, stand up, that'd be great, and then bring it round to here.
I'd just like to bring a few numbers to the debate. Norway contains about 10 gigawatt hours of energy. The recent Royal Society report on storage, which had a lot of problems with it, but it said we needed 123 terawatt hours. So even if you had 100 Norwegs, which there's no room for, that would still only give you about 1% of what's needed for storage. So renewables and storage doesn't work. The reason why it doesn't work is because, one of the reasons why it doesn't work is renewables are huge, have got a very low return on energy invested. And a system that gives you dispatchable power would have a system ROI of about 3, which means that for every 100 units of energy you get out as net energy, you need to put in 150 units of gross energy to get it out. Our current system works on an ROI of about 30, which means we need to put in 104 units of gross energy to get 100 units out. So the basic physics of renewables don't work and will never work. And that ROI is driven by being hugely mineral intensive. The critical minerals required for solar and wind are roughly 10 times that of nuclear or gas or coal. So to make them work, yes, people are getting interested in mining because we need to increase mining of those critical minerals by a factor of 10 across the world, which is a much bigger scar, which is a very large scar on the environment and arguably a bigger scar than a bit more CO2.
Okay.
There's been a 20% yearly increase in battery efficiency over the past 20 years, and according to the Energy Efficiency Office, this means that in 5 years we will have batteries storing 2,000 watt hours per litre, and in 10 years they will be able to store over 50,000 watt hours per litre. Also, renewable energy is still cheapest according to the UK government and United Nations. And in light of this information, would it not be a good idea to start building renewable energy plants now, so when the battery technology does come around, we can use that renewable energy to get reliable and cheap energy.
Everyone's saying about biofuels. About biofuels, they're going to be, be able to do planes and aeroplanes and everything. But what about food production? Because at the moment, you're growing biofuels and then people are starving because we're using that when actually the most important thing for human life is water and food. And so should we be going down the biofuel route?
Right, okay, so I'm going to bring the panel back in to respond to some of that stuff and to especially the earlier speakers if they want to respond to things that were said to them as well. So Michaela, is there anything you want to pick up on?
And just the point about renewable energy, it's very difficult. You can't say it's cheaper or more expensive, or it's different in different situations. So you can't make these vast generalizations. What seems to be true is that with new technologies, as they're introduced, there is a green premium. That's what Bill Gates would call it. It costs more when you introduce things because you're producing them at really low volumes. So once you increase the volume, you achieve economies of scale and you reduce the price. That's nothing to do with technology. That's to do with economies of scale. And we know that. Moore's law is a great example. So really, we can't just limit ourselves to these broad brush strokes. What we can see in the developing world is that they are deploying renewables because it's better financially for them. And it's not that they're exclusively deploying renewables, they're deploying all types of technologies, and they won't rely on any one of them. And we shouldn't rely on any one of them. Sadly, we do rely, I would say, too much on fossil fuels today, and we need to liberate that dependency. That's it. It's not that we want to ban this or ban that. No, it's just that you have to have a more liberal power energy market where you encourage different types of technologies. On the biofuels question in particular, there are fuels that you can make from waste, for example, formulated fuels. And so you can actually not take food crops and use to create biofuels. But you could also take other crops. And I know that Ecotricity has got a green gas concept that they're talking about just growing grass and making biofuels from grass, just from all of the grass cuttings we get all the time anyway. So it's not that there's a shortage of space or a shortage of feedstock for these fuels. There's plenty of feedstock. We're just not managing it well. And that really is my central point about the regulation and creating energy policy frameworks that are informed by science and evidence, and they are actually managed well. So I think in a way we're all agreeing to some degree about that there should be a portfolio of energy technologies. It's not one or another or at the exclusion of the others. That's not the point. But we have to get that balance right, and that takes some knowledge, some evidence, and it takes good management.
Okay, thank you, Simon.
Yeah, interesting point on the energy bills and the government subsidy of solar. I mean, I think it was a good thing to get solar going, and then when solar created a certain percentage of our energy mix, the government thought, well, how far are we going to keep subsidising people's bills? And you get the legacy from that to your delight. And sort of Friends of the Earth versus George Monbiot on that. George Monbiot was saying, actually, for everyone, nuclear energy would be cheaper, so we shouldn't be subsidising wealthy people with solar panels, which was quite George Monbiot's a left-leaning environmental activist. The nature versus humans thing, I disagree. I think we are symbiotically related to nature. When you urinate, you put nitrogen back into the soil. Should it be against a tree? This is highlighted by James Lovelock in the Theory of Gaia. We are an interrelated species. We have historically chopped down trees and then flowers grow, then willow, and then oak trees. We are part of the system and interrelated, although we should definitely bless the systems which we have benefited from fossil fuels. Ambulances, roads, and so on. Why not make a Tesla ambulance that would do the job? That's not running on fossil fuels. And yeah, I mean, ending the relationship. I mean, it's a bit of coal and gas, isn't it? It's not human. And also a bit of an up yours to Putin. I always find it interesting. Have you ever seen like one of these giant SUVs or trucks with like Trump written on the side? And it's like, yeah, man, keep America on fossil fuels, America. And it's like, well, you're literally funding the Islamic fundamentalists that you hate by advocating for that. And of course, yeah, gas does come from dubious regimes, so I think it's a patriotic duty to get us onto renewables. I mean, on the dinner reg thing, we've got different figures. So Dr. David McKay at Cambridge University did say, yeah, you could have 100 dinner regs, and dinner reg is between 0.5 and 1% of energy use fluctuation, so 100 of those would make that work. So we disagree on the figures. It's, yeah. But we have the opportunity of hydrogen, so you can use the electricity to make green hydrogen. Renewable electricity can be used to make green hydrogen. That's great storage. You also have flywheels, not just flashy wheels on a car. No, flywheels are giant metal discs which can store 100 gigawatt hours of energy. That's a great storage method. So it's not just batteries, not just dinner reg lakes, but yeah, flywheels, hydrogen, even methanol can be made with renewable energy to take out those ebbs and flows, and everyone benefits. Mining, fair trade, like chocolate used to be very exploitative. The banana plantations in South America, people would get sprayed with pesticides, get cancer, go infertile. Cocoa, slavery involved and exploitative practices, fluctuations, people going bankrupt and starving in the cocoa industry. Principles of fair trade started by often the Christian church and left-leaning activists and environmentalists. That has made the cocoa industry a thriving thing where people benefit and we get coffee and cocoa. Why not do the same for mining? It is an issue, but it's not inevitable. Actually, a friend of mine, somewhat involved in this, did go to the Congo, and their mine is much better than the ones using lots of children. We can improve that, and it's not inevitable. We have to exploit people to get the elements that we need for a renewable future.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Ralph?
All right. I think sometimes the quibbling about the numbers distracts us from the kind of the basic idea of energy. And let me just tell you, as I consider myself a storyteller, let me tell you a story. Imagine you go to a potential internet provider, right? And the internet provider offers you two packages. Like one is, I don't know, £20 a month, and the other one is £5 a month. You're going to say, oh, I take the £5 package, right? That's so much better. So they say, but is there a catch, right? And then the guy is going to say, well, like when it works, it's really, really good, right? The internet is super fast. But there is a chance that on some days it doesn't. And say, okay, what days would that be? Well, we don't know, right? We have a feeling it could be in the fall, right? And it doesn't really work at night at all. But I mean, who needs the internet at night? So you say, okay, so you say it's very cheap when it works, but it probably doesn't work most of the time. And to give you an example, let's take solar in Britain. The capacity factor for solar in Britain is 9.7%. So this means that solar panels on average produce energy 9.7% of the time. I'm sorry, you cannot run your grid on this. I mean, this is just this is impossible. And then what do? You say, okay, I take the £5 package and I take the £20 package so that I have constant internet connection. So then people, right, and then somebody says, well, the £5 is great, right, it's fantastic. Well, technically it's not £5 a month, you pay £25 a month. Right, you probably tell your friends, I only pay the £5, but deep down you know you actually pay for the other package as well. And this is the problem with intermittency, right? You must look at this from the perspective, this is like heartbeats or breath, right? You cannot store them, right? I cannot, if your doctor tells you, your heart beats perfectly 99% of the time, but it doesn't 1% of the time, you better get a gravestone, right? Because then it's over. So this is the problem. And the other thing, the young gentleman, you made a good point.
It's an analogy, because you can store electricity. You can't store heartbeats, but we have electric cars.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. And I'm always terrified when I have these debates, because I say, oh my God, what if they come up with something that I don't know and haven't heard, and then, you know, my entire argument, my entire spiel breaks down, and I can only make the 5 jokes that I have. But luckily enough, that's not really happening, because the young gentleman kind of said it. What we do is we say, okay, here's battery storage. Then you take like a ruler, make a line like this and say, and in 20 years we're going to be there. This is not how it works. Moore's law, you mentioned this. Moore's law in the microchip era has been an exception and not the rule. So I constantly hear, in 20 years we'll have the technology. You know what? When we have the technology in 20 years, I'm all for it. But
so you can say, hold on, my last point.
To say that we don't have the technology yet, but we really, really, really strongly believe we're going to have it in 20 years. So cut us off from nuclear, cut us off from coal, cut us off from gas, cut us off from oil, because the miracle technology is going to be there, hopefully. Again, I'm not going to bet the human future on something we might develop. This is like jumping out of an airplane and saying, I don't really know how this whole parachute thing is going to work, but I'm going to develop it on my way down. Right?
The parachutes do work.
Will do this. And
parachutes work.
And my last point is always, I said this before, but this is something I also want to, quote unquote, indoctrinate the audience. I want a prototype. Right? Give me a city, an average city, and say it can only run on solar, wind, and your preferred kind of storage. You must, not you, of course, generally.
Las Vegas does that with hydroelectricity.
No, they don't. They still have 18%, just like Uruguay.
Tasmania is renewable, is run on renewable energy, so I don't
No,
need to give it.
no, it can't. This is the internet thing, right? They say, oh, over the year we have so and so much, but of course they never tell you that, and then they say, because during high times we exported, and then we imported made from fossils, but on average, on balance, it's all renewable. No, we don't have these things, and it's a little bit not from you, but generally it's misleading to claim that we do, because it doesn't exist.
Okay. It started off as such a well-behaved panel. But I'm enjoying it. James, any points you want to pick up?
Well, I think we have to accept that when we talk about green or clean, because we're so moral, what we really mean is Chinese Communist Party, because that's really where it's all coming from. If you take photovoltaic panels, nearly every stage in their production, from wafers to cells to everything else, is dominated by China, or more accurately by the Chinese Communist Party. If you take green hydrogen, which is the sort that you make from renewable sources, the leading facility is in Xinjiang, just by chance, where they oppress the Uyghurs. It's 250 megawatts, and just 58% of the green hydrogen that they produce there, which is the largest in the world, is solar powered. The rest is coal powered. So what we find is that there's just an element of unreality about the renewables faction. And that's what I was heading towards in my opening remarks about green, blue, grey, pink, hydrogen. Or why not have trans hydrogen? I mean, if a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, then maybe renewables, can work 100% of the time with no oil, no gas, or any of those things. Let's believe it. Let's believe that Hamas was a national liberation struggle on the 7th of October, that it was an initiative, as some left groups have called it, or an uprising, as some other left groups have called it. No, we've got to stare reality in the face, and it just cannot be done to pretend that renewables are cheaper or more reliable than fossil fuels. Now, if we take any of the ingredients that go into panels or into wind turbines, you will find that they strongly rely on rare earths, they strongly rely on nickel and silver. How are these machines made, solar panels? How are offshore wind turbines put offshore? Was it electric boats that took them offshore? Was it, the panels made entirely by green-powered solar electricity? No, it wasn't. If you take the final number is, if you take the world installation of offshore wind, it's the capacity, which isn't the same as what is delivered, is 64 gigawatts. The net zero target for offshore wind is 2,000 gigawatts. In solar, you've got about 200, 300 gigawatts. The target is 4,500. So, when we're talking pie in the sky, then that's the renewables point of view.
It's called ambition, not pie in the sky. And it's way more energy than a bit of oil on the boats to build the wind turbine. A wind turbine gets back the energy after 3 months of producing energy from its productions. It's a completely false, almost as false as the analogy between a wind turbine and Hamas. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
But then why is the wind, a serious question, then why is the wind industry collapsing? Like, if supposedly it's this miracle industry and they're collapsing left and right.
Because of policy failure. And policy failure in this country is really holding us up. You've just said about manufacturing of these green technologies. I mean, electric vehicles are still considered the solution in terms of energy policy in this country. We don't make batteries in this country. That's a choice. That's not what we've been forced into. We should be making these things and actually showing leadership. We can't just talk about leadership and pretend that because somebody else is manufacturing it and we can't see the carbon and we can't see the hardship that people go through in the manufacture of those goods, that it doesn't exist. It does exist. And if we onshore it, then we are in control of it. We shouldn't demand it and then get somebody else to save us.
Right,
We should
right,
be doing it
right.
ourselves.
Okay, now I'm going to let Ralph have one sentence and then we're going back out to you.
One sentence? Okay, just one sentence. Policy failure is correct, but I think the policy failure runs the other way. The Germans have spent 320 billion for renewables and it led them to nowhere. So we've been, politics shoved down renewables our throat, and now we say, well, the policy didn't support them. I think we over-supported them, and now, it's platitudes versus reality, and reality is reasserting itself.
Right, okay, right, we're going to go out to the audiences, the festival.
Should business be allowed to pollute the environment for free?
Contrary to what Michaela said, we're not having a portfolio of different types of energy. We are actually trying to ban them. I mean, you said that we're not trying to ban them. Well, the government is trying to ban fossil fuels, isn't it? And anyway, the developing world remains impoverished. That is a fact. And as James said, what they need is gas and nuclear. But there is a huge political ill will against fossil fuels, and the idea that renewables are cheap. We've already gone on talked about that. As Ralph mentioned, Germany. Germany has incredibly expensive energy now because it was invested the most in renewables.
Because it closed down its nuclear power.
Okay.
And another place being California, where they've got they're in the threat of blackouts, incredibly expensive energy because they've invested so much in renewables. We've seen it rolled out. As you said, we need to roll it out. We've seen it rolled out, and it's not working. It is a huge political barrier. It's not just stop oil. It's not just pressure groups like Friends of the Earth. It's the United Nations and our own government who are against energy and for us and for the developing world. And that's what we need to tackle.
I have a lot of problems with the environmental movement, but I want to focus on one that is almost never mentioned by environmentalists, is scalability of the solutions we're talking about. Simon's brought up the two lakes pumping thingy in Wales. There is almost nowhere in the country where we can actually do that, and building those things is incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive. You can't use that as a primary storage solution. The scalability of batteries, all right, yes, we technically have enough lithium in all of the world, but there is a limit to the production, and there's a cost of getting lithium from less and less rich sources. Wind turbines, we should be talking about copper production more than we should be talking about lithium production, because the copper industry is not prepared for the amount of copper that would be needed to produce to make all of the EVs, which I work in EVs and there's a lot of copper in those things. Neodymium magnets are to get copper. It's the volume of copper that we need. So please talk about scalability. The only scalable energy solution that's green and clean is nuclear.
Yeah, we've heard the arguments against fossil fuels, we've heard the arguments against renewables. So I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on nuclear. Maybe that's the solution that avoids the problems of both the others.
So maybe use a thimbleful of fossil fuels around what Ralph said to bring maybe a bit of philosophy to this, I guess, because ambition's been talked about, in terms of almost thermodynamics almost. I see this kind of low-grade ambition and maybe high-grade ambition. So I'm not against any particular green technology or whatever. In fact, I started off 40 years ago, I did a study in hydrogen as a fuel for aircraft, right? I rapidly come to the conclusion that turbines were not going to work, even with solar, whatever. Okay, technology's moved on a bit. But what I wonder is, when we talk about ambition, why don't we talk in terms of almost demoralising what is energy, which is power, and have the ambition where we actually research and have a goal where we aim to produce as much power as needed. Almost there's an excess of power that we can go and waste it, because I think that, and I know I kind of fully explain this here, but having that kind of goal where actually alters how people think about innovation, right? You can have Blinkwood. I use the word Blinkwood, but I just begin looking in one direction.
Microphone.
Whereas you can have innovation where you look around anyway. It's easy to become blinkered, by any particular technology, whether it's nuclear or whatever. So but my key point is, let's have the wider long-term goal where we have, I won't use the word infinite, but we have abundant energy, where we can waste it if we want to, where the whole of the rest of the world can have a standard of living and things like this and a bit more. But so I just think that changes how we think about innovation, thinking, and it demoralises it as well.
So the intermittency problem is not just a couple of hours of intermittency. The Germans have a word for Dunkelflaute, which means sort of long dark period. And in the northern hemisphere, you can get days, even up to a week, where there's no sun and no wind. So you need something to be able to provide power during that period. So for any modern economy, you need a grid that can provide power 100% of the time, which effectively means you need effectively two energy grids, a renewable one and an alternative to use when the renewable one isn't producing power. That effectively drives up the cost of electricity. So if you're running your gas power station 100% of the time, you can charge X for it. If somebody says to you, you're only going to run that 50% of the time, how much are you going to charge for it? Twice the amount, right? So we in the West, we pay an expensive cost for power. It's about 6 times what they pay in China and Vietnam, right? So we're not going to build any electric cars or batteries here. No energy intensive industry in its right mind would build an industry in the UK. Right? They go to China, right? And to suggest that the developing world can afford to pay the prices that we pay for electricity is ludicrous, right? They deserve the same power, reliable, cheap energy that we have, and the way they're going to get that is from coal at the moment. Ideally, they'd get it from gas.
Yeah. On the economics of this whole thing, I'm nervous that we've seen how sensitive our economies are to an increase in energy with inflation and rates. And I'm worried that even though we need to address the climate crisis, moving to more expensive energy could actually hinder our response, because we need innovation to address these problems. And innovation comes from a strong economy. So I'm nervous that in trying to address the climate crisis in the West, we actually stymie all of the incremental innovations we can make, and make the climate crisis worse as a result.
Hi, I come from a technical background, and I feel a bit like I'm a CEO listening to a load of techies bickering about what they're going to do and throwing loads of statistics at me. And what I'm tempted to do is say, look, hang on, go away and get some project managers, write a requirements document, right? How much energy do we use in the UK? Break it down. What do we use it for, right? How do we supply it? Oil and coal and stuff, right? Show me that in pie charts, right? Then give me a scenario saying, okay, if we cover the whole of the Isle of Wight in windmills and solar farms, just hypothetically, right, would that solve it? No? Okay, well, how about the whole of Norfolk and Suffolk? Would that solve it? And when we get to sort of, yeah, that would solve it, then we get a grip on what we have to do to solve this problem. So I think I need a requirements document, and then I need a plan. And I think the guy, I think maybe an Israeli guy, I can't tell, the guy second from the left, the idea of a pilot is sorry. I think the idea of a pilot is brilliant. That's what we need to do. Just like, okay, we'll pick a city and just do it.
Thank you. 2 questions. One more political historical question, and one more on the democratic side. On the political historical side, clearly this debate has shown that there is competing argument, shall we say at least, controversy about the relative merits of different fuels or different sources of energy. So could the panel explain why is it you think that all Western governments, pretty much all Western governments, have adopted the agenda of renewables first whenever there has been so much controversy? You know, what's driving this to become the dominant mantra? And second, a bit linked on the democratic question, I mean, I've spent some time this year in India, living in India for periods. And it was the more developed part of India, actually. But power cuts were frequent and, unannounced, right? And when you talk to people, as I did, Indian people there, they're well aware of pollution, they're well aware of climate change, but their priority is to have reliable and affordable energy by whatever means, right? And so in that context then, and we're talking about, renewables saving the world or whatever is the title, would it be at least anti-democratic for international institutions to impose on countries like India or many other less developed countries who do not have reliable and cheap energy, to impose upon them an agenda which seems more popular, seems more fashionable within the West? That seems to me to be very anti-democratic in relation to other people.
Do any of the panel know if we can ever reuse or reopen our coal industry? That's the first question. And secondly, James, isn't it just a bit of a problem that our oil is inconveniently underneath other people's land?
People will talk about moral questions. Let me throw one in, whether you want to pick up on it or not, it's up to you. So on this side of the panel, if the solutions that you're suggesting don't work out, do we carry on burning fossil fuels, or do we just make do with less energy? If it comes to that, you may say it will never come to that, but. And on this side of the panel, do you think climate change is an issue? And if you do you think that you can still justify burning fossil fuels? Surely we need to find a way out of that question. So, but anything else you want to pick up as well?
I'm really interested in the economics of energy, because that's come up in a lot of the questions, somehow, the economics of energy. So the economics of energy and pollution, saying, should businesses be able to pollute for free? We all pollute for free. We all dump to air. That's what we're doing every day when we switch on our gas boiler, when we drive our cars, if they're fossil fuel. So, yeah, we're all doing that. And the problem is the capacity of the atmosphere is finite. And that's the problem. So somehow, economics have not accounted for pollution. And that's the core of the problem. In my personal opinion, I would like to see a level playing field between all technologies. I'm not trying to ban any technologies. I don't think that we should stop nuclear. I'm not a big fan, I'll be honest. But that's because I've worked with nuclear scientists and I've seen what they do. And that's a different story. I'll tell you over a coffee. However, what I'd like to see is that these technologies are funded equally. Nuclear power roughly gets £40 billion a year. I can't find the proper statistic because nobody publishes it. And that's a year in the UK of public money. Now, I know what the numbers are in hydrogen. It's roughly 50 million, maybe 100 million per year. So that's 40 billion versus 100 million. That's not a level playing field. I'd like to see level playing fields between technologies. We need all the tools in the box, not just hydrogen. I'm not saying that that's going to run the world. I'd like to see everybody coming in. But I think that if people want to ban things and stop things, I wonder why they don't like the competition somehow. Is it because it's going to win? Maybe that's why. So let's open it up a little bit.
Okay, Simon.
To quote Donald Trump, the renewable industries of the world are collapsing. That is fake news. Siemens, the big renewable energy supplier, has got big problems because of some faults with their products. That is why they are suffering badly at the moment. The renewable energy industry generally is thriving. Another straw man argument, Germany suffering massively. You see it on the internet. Energy prices spiralling, people going out of business because of energy. They cancelled all of their nuclear power stations. They closed them prematurely without planning. So bizarrely, the Green Party there was like, right, Fukushima happened. Let's just close down all the nuclear power plants. And then like coal went up. I've got the figure here, but like 300 million tons of carbon were created by burning more lignite coal in Germany. So and they have invested in renewables as well, but actually the energy problems and the prices that they have is caused by them closing down nuclear power plants. It's interesting, a gentleman at the back mentioned, copper resources not being enough. Well, I suspect that, just like with the diamond industry, maybe the mining companies are kind of, we haven't got that much copper, that's why we're doubling the price, just like most of the HS2 suppliers. And I think market forces will meet that. It's difficult to know. With the biomass issue, should we be using food? It's going to happen with plastics. Has anyone heard of the FSC mark, Forest Stewardship Council? It's a logo on wood, so it guarantees they're not clear-cutting forests to make your IKEA bed, for example. There should be the FSC logo for bioplastics and for biomass energy as well, and it should be waste products from trimming grasses and other things, as you said. We've got the storage capacities. Yeah, okay, the figures on the lake system, I may be wrong there. That comes down, really, the environmental charity should be commissioning well-costed reports on these things, as should the government. Storage, we can store energy as hydrogen. That gets rid of all the intermittencies. Flywheels, we've got the technology. This can happen. I mean, if every house had 1 billion batteries across the country in the house, do you think we would have any problems with the ebbs and flows of renewables? We wouldn't. That would solve the problem. I met a chap from Nigeria, a Commonwealth Economic Council meeting, and they've got decentralized energy in Africa just by default. They've got solar panels in their little villages, and they didn't have electricity before. That powers refrigeration and lighting at night time. Yeah, that's not mass industry, but this idea, environmentalists like holding these people back. No, they're thriving from renewable energy and decentralized solutions, and that's a really good thing. And actually, a lot of the victims of climate change are in these countries, and it's the excessive rains, the excessive droughts, which affect their food supply, and it's actually empathy for them, which really made me an environmentalist primarily, not some god of the environment or something. It's people. Environmental solutions help people, and coal reserves, 70 years, we've got 1,000 years worth of unlimited sun and hydro energy. Probably we could live off our coal for 50 to 70 years. Maybe we should keep that in reserves, and 1,000 years worth of nuclear fuel. So the future is definitely green. I hope you can come on board with this. Come on.
Okay, Ralph?
Well, as I said, I think I always like to kind of look more at the forest than to look at the trees. And again, to give you one number, if you look at the amount of energy being used by an individual in the West as an equivalent of a barrel of oil, we use about 12 to 14 barrels of oil, or the wealthiest 1 billion on the planet uses about 14 barrels of oil, and the other 7 billion use about 4 barrels of oil. And if we believe that they will stuck to those 4 barrels, we'll be surprised. And again, I agree with everything that Simon says, but I'm just being deliberately provocative now. But it's a little bit, and not you, again, I don't want to be personal, but there's a little arrogance to this, to kind of say, well, I mean, so now we have a couple of solar panels in Nigeria, and so now these savages have a little bit of refrigeration. And I said, I'm a little bit provocative, but the point is, what drives pollution the most is not the number of people. This is another kind of, I guess, a strawman term. It's urbanization. And you cannot urbanize without fossil fuels. You need streets, you need glass, you need steel, you need all these kind of things. And you can say, oh, well, we can do this, green steel, all these kind of things. Yes, you can do this, but that means it's more expensive. Because this is the other debate we don't have. It's not just about the availability of energy, it's also the price. As the Germans are currently finding out, yeah, it's great that you don't have gas from Russia, but LNG from the United States is significantly more expensive, and somebody's going to pay for that, and mostly it's a taxpayer. Now, one last uplifting thing, or maybe 2 uplifting things. One is, or maybe 3, I don't know. If because you asked the climate question, right? To be honest, it's irrelevant what I think about the climate question. And it's irrelevant for the very simple fact, as I said, the developing world will continue to develop. They will not stop developing because we tell them to. So whether it's going to be 1.5, 2.5, or 3 degrees Celsius, my argument is, and that's kind of my most provocative line for today, if you have a good bottle of wine at home or a good bottle of whiskey at home, and you believe that what kind of the more pessimistic climate projections say, you shouldn't save that bottle. You might want to open it up tonight, because we are running the experiment. Like the 1.5 goal, the 2 degree goal is not going to be met. It's not going to happen. And I'm not saying it's because I'm against or for it. I'm just saying if you look at the numbers, it's not going to happen. There's one more thing that's equally important. Going back to the question a lady had about pollution. We had a fantastic energy revolution starting in 2008, the so-called shale revolution. The shale revolution was probably one of the greatest things that happened to humanity, but we don't talk about it because it has the dirty F word in it. No, not that F word, the fossil word in. But if you look at this, what happened in the United States got cheaper energy, more energy, and less pollution and less emissions, because natural gas is, again, another miraculous substance. But everybody in the West says, oh, we can do this here, we cannot do this here. So what we didn't do is, and this is, I think James went a little bit off topic on this, but he does make a good point. So what are we doing now? We go to Qatar, right? We go to Saudi Arabia, we go to all these other countries and say, can you please give us your fossil fuels? While at the same time, we tell our population at home, we'll be our fossil fuels in 2050. At the same time, when we make contracts until 2050 with the Qataris. So those two things don't work. As a friend of mine uses to say, what Western politicians trying to do is they try to ride two horses with one ass, or as you say here, with one arse. And this is not going to work, right? You cannot have it both ways. You cannot say off fossil fuels and at the same time travel around the world and ask everybody for their fossil fuels. And as I said, reality, everything is going to regress to the mean at some point, as the Germans find out now. So reality will reassert itself. This is going to happen. Unfortunately, and I say this again, unfortunately, what we think in this room, what we think in the West about the matter of climate change, and I share the concerns. I'm just saying the assumption that people will voluntarily give up their strive for economic well-being, their strive for better living standards, that they will give this up in the name of climate. I don't think this is going to happen. It's not happening here. Why do you think, just to the last point, why do you think that governments in Europe scrambled panically in 2022 to buy up every single morsel of energy they could when it became clear there could be a real energy crisis? Because the Germans, the French, the British, they know if the lights go out for 24 hours, you have a revolution. So again, they talk it, but they do something else. Now, what was the consequence? The Europeans are rich. Who didn't have energy in 2022? Pakistan, Indonesia. And what are they doing? They return to coal. Because coal, like in a good relationship, unfortunately, is reliable. It might be old, it's dirty, that all is true, but it's reliable. You have a huge stockpile of it, and then you can ensure that your people have electricity. Because they know in Pakistan, if they don't have energy, the regime is gone. So the reality is unfortunately not what we wish for, and I like ambitions. But imagine you go to the doctor, right? You want to have the best doctor and not the most ambitious doctor. And it's the same in energy, right? You want the best system and not the most ambitious one.
Okay,
I think deliberately provocative, of course.
Okay. I thought the F word you were going to use there was fracking, but anyway, James.
Well, is there a CO2 problem? Do we have climate change that's anthropogenic? Not only that, created by man and woman? Yes, we do. Does it need solving? Yes. Is it a climate catastrophe, an apocalypse? No. How do we solve it? Not by economizing on our energy use, but by being more thoughtful about our energy supply. In order to be more thoughtful, we should abandon the term renewables. None of us are renewing the sun. We are not renewing wind power. Those are astronomically caused flows of energy, primarily by the sun, in the case of tidal power by the moon. They're extremely diffuse, they're extremely hard to harness, and they're extremely hard to store. So the solutions are very much involve nuclear power, which doesn't generate CO2, that will have no impact on accelerating climate change. There is no silver bullet. Michaela's right about that. And from my side of the panel, I'm not in favour of banning any energy source. Just being clear-eyed about them is important. Why are renewables adopted by governments? A very good question, if they have all the defects that I think should be apparent to people. And the answer is because governments don't have much more of an ideology about anything except survival. In the first place, their own survival. And in the second place, that vote-winning, eye-catching initiative, as Tony Blair would describe it, our own survival. So by raising the spectre of climate change, irrevocable, irreversible, runaway climate change, the apocalypse that we're hearing about all the time, they can get us to repress our needs, repress our need for energy, travel less, and do those things. The banners are not on this side of the table. They're the ones who want to introduce bans on private mobility through the motor car. Now that brings us to the important point. Should the polluter pay? And the answer is the polluter should pay. But the polluter is not all of us, Michaela. You are not polluting the planet by putting your central heating on. Was gas as central heating mechanism in this country. No, somebody else installed your central heating system. If you want to blame every householder for climate change, then you really are going on along with the government and repressing what people need. And the most disgraceful example of this is what's happening in Africa. Unlike Ralph here, I don't agree with anything Simon has said. Because if you think the future for Africa is solar-powered lamps in every mud hut, that is the way forward, what's called energy access by our friends at the United Nations and by the European Union, you're not providing for a way forward for Africa. You are condemning them not to industrialize, because industrialization requires centralized energy sources that are cheap, not a light bulb in a mud hut. That is a disgraceful attitude to take to Africa, and it borders on racism. We need to get rid of it.
Why
wait a minute, you're not so intermittent yourself. It's about the right time you've interrupted me. I haven't interrupted you once. So please, can we uphold Africa's right to develop through fossil fuels? Thank you.
I will bring the panel back, but it will only be for about a minute each at the end. So we've got about 5 minutes for your contributions, but it'd be great if you could keep them short.
So first of all, I just want to start by saying I'm generally agree with you two here on the right. I don't think you get enough credit for the work you do. I think it's very important. You work very hard. My question to you two would be, what do you think is actually the biggest barrier in terms of this? Do you think it's the companies? Do you think it's the government? Because I do think there is kind of this deliberate, I don't want to say bad actors, but people who just seem to have it out for renewables. And I was going to say, what do you think is the plan around that? And my question to you two would be, do you not think that Britain, we could be a leader in this sort of renewable industry? Do you not think we kind of have a duty to do that? And, not just Europe, I think worldwide, we have tidal, we've got the biomass, we've got the wind, we've got hydroelectric. Could we not capitalise on that and become a world leader again? Do you not think we have a duty to pursue that?
Okay, I'm just wondering, in terms of the world that we would have based on renewables and how much it would be based on restriction and authoritarian policies.
Earlier this year, we had the National Grid paying people to use less energy. And the subtext of that was that if they don't do that, then the lights might go out. I just wondered if the panel thinks that that's going to happen more in the future.
Thank you. My question is to Simon and you, sir. I come from India, so the idea that I want to gain from you two is, I understand that renewables is something that is very new, especially in this century, and it will, sort of metastasize. But in terms of educating the younger generation, children who are in schools right now, what can we do to give them a kind of a forage into this idea, so that, like you said, that you build economies of scale. That is how you achieve, democratization of renewable energy. So what can be done at the very, in terms of society, at the very grassroots level? That's right.
My question is more about, so we talked a lot about how renewables can help produce electricity, but not so much around the other forms of energy that we use. So things like fertilizer, making steel, concrete, long-term, long-distance cargo. There might be an argument that renewables can solve the electricity problem, but there is absolutely nothing to do all of these others, and that's actually like 75, 80% of energy. So I just wondered if your guys could touch on that and maybe you could.
Right, I'm going to have to call it a day on audience contributions. I'm sorry about that. It's been a fantastic and passionate debate, but we do have to end on time because there's sessions starting shortly after this one. So, panel, I know there's loads on the table, but if you would like to just concentrate on one takeaway point for 1 minute, that would be really great. So, Michaela, what's your point?
So just address the key barrier. At the moment, for me, it's policy, and it's making good energy policy. Like you said, it wasn't my decision to just rely on the gas system for Britain and my gas boiler. But so technology has an incredible offer here. And you're right, we could lead the world. And who doesn't know that technology is a hot investment? And also you can become the richest person in the world through technology. You can't do that through any other sector. So technology for me is the key. Fuels is a lot less interesting because fuels will reduce over time, but hydrogen and green fuels is important in long distance transport, freight, for example, rail systems, the HGVs. We know that it's already there, and there are examples all around the world, and I won't bore you with them, but all around the world where these are working and they are economic already. They will grow, and that's why it's an exciting space.
Okay, thank you. Simon.
Great, yeah. I'll squeeze into 1 minute. I mean, I resent racism accusation. I think it's racist not to deal with these issues because the victims of climate change are largely the poor, non-white people in the world. I think actually it is our fault. If you're at home with the windows open and the heating on, and you're wearing a T-shirt in the middle of winter with the heating on, that is your responsibility. That's more racist. You're causing harm. You're too lazy to wear a jumper, and that would apply to Sadiq Khan running thousands of train stations with the lights left on, sunlight streaming through. That energy waste is our responsibility. And I think, again, racism it's like, well, actually we're causing all the pollution, other people are getting the harm. So I do think we have a huge moral obligation. There are solutions. And this sort of mud hut nonsense, come on, that's just ridiculous. Like, yeah, there are mud huts that now have solar panels. There are proper buildings that now have solar panels in Africa. We shouldn't deny them that. And they need industry as well. But actually they want a clean system and maybe nuclear power and renewable power that can meet their needs for industrialisation. And that's something to celebrate. And that is beneficial to everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. Ralph.
It's just going to be 1 minute. I mean, basically, one sentence I would like all of you to remember and maybe go away from this panel, and I think this is something we actually all agree is a very simple one, which is energy is life. Energy is the great liberator. Energy has enabled the use of energy in all its forms. Right? I'm not against renewables. I just think they're not reliable enough. They're not where they're supposed to be. But the kind of life we have was enabled to us by an ever better way, by ever more efficient ways, by ever more abundant ways, as the gentleman said before, an abundance of energy. And I think we should be humbled and grateful for kind of what has been achieved over the last 200 years after the Industrial Revolution, which was an energy revolution most of the time. We all profit from this. And I think we are deluding ourselves if we think if we reduce this great liberator, our liberty is going to go with it. Because as I said, there will always be some who can afford more than others. And those who can afford more will not exploit others. As I said, energy has liberated more people than anything else in the world. It is life, it sustains life, it enables life, and anything that can give us that opportunity and possibility we should pursue, including renewables, right, where they make sense. But as I said before, can I last facetious comment, solar in northern Germany or in Norway? I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much, Ralph. And finally, James, your minute.
Could Britain be a world leader? I think in turning the lights off at Sadiq Khan's railway stations, we could lead the world. I mean, let's improve women's safety. Turn all the lights off on the tube and, don't go out of your home. Could we be a world leader? Yeah, we could be if we made wooden cars. They would be truly renewable. You could grow new tree trunks and then you wouldn't have any plastics in cars, no iron, no steel, no textiles. No liquid crystal displays, no light-emitting diodes, just a pure wooden car. That's the way forward. We can show the world how to organise things. I'm a bit sceptical. I'm a lot less sceptical about Britain reviving its coal stocks and also drilling in the North Sea for oil and gas. Those have proven benefits. Nobody talked about carbon capture and storage, which would be important for mitigating CO2 at the production stage. But we need to lead the world, if we're going to do it, in clarity of thought. And black cannot be white, ladies and gentlemen. Renewables cannot power the world.
Okay, thank you very much to our panel.